We're on. Yes.
Hi, everybody, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State. I wasn't with you on Friday. I had to have some oral surgery. So forgive any mispronunciation today of words. My tongue is still a little swollen. And forgive me for making it a little shorter, but it's not it's not as easy to speak as it usually is. The only really important organ in my body is my tongue. So I was, I'm a little on the handicapped side. There is now proof that the Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and Natalia Veselnitskaya was a setup by Fusion GPS. Fusion, which was the firm that was hired to do by Hillary to do the negative research on Trump, had a problem. How do you prove collusion and conspiracy when there's no meeting? The two sides never got together. And so to solve that problem, they lured Trump Jr. into a meeting at Trump Tower, promising him that they would give him negative material on Hillary. And when he got there was no negative material. What they talked about instead were the sanctions that had been imposed on Russia for the treatment and the murder of Magnitsky, the anti-corruption investigator who exposed this huge scandal that Putin made almost $250 million from. And Veselnitskaya, let's just call her Natalie, okay? was the lawyer who was representing the guys who were guilty in that scandal, and she was trying to get the sanctions lifted, and she used the opportunity to pitch Trump to lift the sanctions. She said she was meeting with him to encourage adoptions of Russian children, but that was disingenuous. Putin had slapped a freeze on adoptions as retaliation against the sanctions. But why did the meeting take place? Well, right before the meeting, literally an hour before, Glenn Simpson, the head of Fusion, met with Natalie. And right after the meeting, he met with Natalie. He bookended the meeting with two meetings with Natalie that Glenn Simpson, the head of Fusion, held. And then, 11 days after the meeting, Christopher Steele, the MI6 agent hired by Glenn Simpson and Fusion with Hillary's money, who was in charge of amassing this anti-Trump dossier, issued the first dossier, the first of 18 dossiers that comprise this package. And in it, the dossier said, the Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years. Aim, endorsed by Putin, has been to encourage splits and divisions in the Western alliance. Trump and his inner circle have accepted a regular flow of intelligence from the Kremlin, including on his Democratic and other political rivals, specifically Democratic nominee Hillary Rodham Clinton. So they have this meeting that's set up on a total pretext that has nothing to do with Trump Jr. or Sr. And then a few days later, the dossier reports that they've been holding meetings. So obviously the meeting was set up as a setup to provide evidence that there was in fact a meeting. And then when the investigation reached that point, Fusion and Hillary's people leaked the fact that there was a meeting to prove that this collusion actually had taken place. Now, this is significant because, first of all, it shows what a phony job the dossier is. But secondly, because it really implies that Fusion and Steele may have been the people who wrote the dossier all along. That literally they were hired by the Hillary campaign and they sat down and did some creative writing and put the dossier together. Because obviously Simpson played the main role in orchestrating this meeting with Trump, and then Steele follows with the memo in the dossier indicating that this was all a set-up job by Simpson. Now, we've always wondered who wrote the dossier, who gave Christopher Steele the unsolicited information that he said was the core of the research for the dossier. And it now appears very possible that Fusion itself was the source of information for this, since the head of Fusion, Glenn Simpson, and Fusion operative Natalie Veselnitskaya participated in the only known meeting between Trump people and the Russians, and 1 week later it appeared in the dossier, it is likely that Simpson and Natalia Veselnitskaya were the sources of the disinformation in the dossier. So that raises the question of why did they need Christopher Steele if they were just going to cook this thing up at home? And the answer is that you couldn't use as credibility a negative research firm that was contractor in the United States. You needed someone with more gravitas, who was more respected. And Steele was highly respected. He had been the head of MI6 desk for Moscow after he retired from service as an active spy. He had been an agent in Russia, spying for 3 years, ending in the early 1990s. He had done work for both MI6 and the FBI, had been paid by both, so he was taken very seriously, and what he said counted. So Simpson used him to be a credible source, a front man for the information in the dossier, and the evidence is increasingly amassing that the dossier itself may have been just a creature of Simpson's imagination, and that's how this whole thing started. Now, Eileen and I have progressed in our thinking on this. We used to think that Simpson wrote it himself, but then it turned out he said under oath that he didn't. Then it seemed that maybe it was given to him by British or American intelligence, the FBI, the CIA. But now it looks like very possibly Fusion just did it itself and published it in an effort to undermine Trump, which was the mandate they had received from the Hillary campaign. And there's a further piece of evidence that came out today. John Podesta, not Tony, the lobbyist, John, Hillary's campaign manager, met with Simpson after the election, and probably as part of this whole effort to reverse the results of the election and drum up a scandal that could perhaps possibly drive Trump out of office.
Dick, Doreen Reynolds wants to know, why is the Podesta group closing?
They're not closing. Tony Podesta left it, and he left it because he doesn't want to get in further trouble, and he doesn't want to drag his firm down with him. Presumably he continues to get income from it, and his leaving it is an indication that he knows that the hounds are after him, and nipping at his heels.
Charlie Adams wants to know, all weekend long the internet has been alight with rumors of indictments sealed against folks for Uranium One. What say you on this, Mr. Morris?
I don't think there are indictments. I mean, there could be of low-level people, but clearly there needs to be a prosecutor with a major mandate to go after those folks. The momentum for the prosecutor has slowed a little bit because everybody's preoccupied with the tax cut bill. But I do think it's coming, and I do think it's unavoidable and irreversible.
And Hector Morales wants to know, isn't Obama in all of this?
Yeah, Obama's pulling the strings for the whole damn thing. The organization that he heads is called OFA, or Organizing for America. And they have an office a few blocks from the White House. And Michelle has her office there, Barack does. I believe that the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, does. I think Valerie Jarrett does. And I think they're calling the shots in this whole thing from the get-go.
And Darlene Meyer-Rubin wants to know, what will the new allegations by the latest woman mean for Moore? She has specific details.
Okay. Well, let's get on to Moore,
okay.
Which was my next topic.
Okay, cool.
First of all, let me tell you that I met Roy Moore I met him for about a whole day we spent together back when the Senate campaign was starting. And I was very impressed with him as a man of great integrity, great morality, a true person in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and I would not have believed these stories about him. And I find it very, very, very suspicious that here you have a guy who was controversial and in the public eye for 40 years. He ran for governor against the incumbent governor, Bob Riley, a client of mine, and was defeated in a primary, and that was a very well-publicized primary. He ran for chief judge of the Supreme Court, which is a very high-profile election in Alabama, and he was elected. And then he was thrown out because he posted the Ten Commandments in the courthouse, and the federal court ruled in an ACLU lawsuit that he would not be permitted to do that. And then after he was thrown off the court, he ran again, and he was elected again to the court. And this time he was thrown off again because he said that the Supreme Court requirement that justices of the peace perform gay marriages was not one that he would uphold in Alabama. So they threw him off the court again, they meaning the U.S. District Court. So, I mean, this guy has been bounced around in controversy. And then the campaign against Luther Strange to win the primary was very, very high profile. So if this woman had information, she probably would have come forth earlier. The reason she didn't come forth until now, or that they didn't bring her forth until now, is that there's a 76-day limit in Alabama law which says that you cannot change your candidate on the ballot within 76 days of an election. So the Democrats wanted to wait until the Republicans had locked in Moore as their candidate, and then they'd come out with this stuff, knowing that the Republicans could not drop Moore and couldn't force him out and put someone else on the ballot. It would still have to be Roy Moore who's running. Now, there is a procedure, apparently, where the governor, who's also a conservative Republican, can postpone the election by a few weeks to let that 75-day window cover the current period of time. I think that this is like the Salem witch trials. I don't know if you followed it at the time. I don't know if you've seen Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, but the Salem witch trial were a bunch of hysterical women who would young women who would just work themselves into a fury and claim that they were under the spell of a witch who was then on trial. And they'd put this poor woman on the stand, and they'd question her, and she'd deny that she was a witch. And then these women, these young women, would have a fit. They'd writhe on the floor. They'd be jumping up and down. They'd be collapsing, fainting, everything obviously under the spell of this witch. And based on that evidence, many of these so-called witches were executed. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. We're supposed to believe this woman after 50 years of not coming forth in public. And I don't believe in trying the victim, but in this case I don't think there was a victim. There was no sex. There was no rape. There was no consensual sex. With two of the women, there was no touching. With this 14-year-old, there allegedly was touching through clothing. But for this to rise to that level of credibility, I think is really a travesty. Now, the other point, and this woman's history is fairly checkered. She's been divorced 3 times. She's declared bankruptcy 3 times. And I have heard reports, I haven't seen them published, of other people, particularly ministers, who she's accused of coming on to her sexually. All of that is possibly true, but it's not worth reversing the result of an election over. I think that Roy Moore should take a lie detector test. I think he should make the results public. And I think that will put this to rest and will solve it one way or the other. And I think that probably is the next step that ought to be taken here. But this is a hit job by the Democrats and by McConnell. And when McConnell acts like the judge and says, okay, I've made my decision, I believe the women, Roy Moore should withdraw, realize that Roy Moore was put up as a candidate against Mitch McConnell. He wasn't his real opponent, a guy named Luther Strange was. But McConnell was the target of the attack by Steve Bannon and that whole crowd. And by the way, let me just remind you why Moore won that primary. Strange outspent him like 16-1 because McConnell pumped money into that race, and Moore didn't have any money. But he won because of the circumstances under which Strange was appointed to the Senate to fill Jeff Sessions' vacancy. Strange had been the Attorney General, and he was investigating the governor. And he had 2 grand juries that were preparing to hand down indictments against the governor. So when the governor appointed Strange to the Senate seat, he vacated the office of Attorney General. The governor then appointed a political ally to fill that job. The ally dismissed the grand juries, and the governor never got indicted. The public went crazy, and he had to resign as governor, and he's no longer there. But I mean, his candidacy was conceived in an act of corruption. And Moore has always been the essence of honesty and straight shooter in that state's often corrupted politics. I mean, there's a limit. Now, the other 2 girls who made, quote, accusations, one of them is a volunteer in the Democrats' campaign in Alabama and worked professionally as the sign language person performing next to Joe Biden when he was giving speeches. And the other was 19 years old at the time. And while it's not the greatest thing in the world for a 32-year-old to be dating an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, with no sexual contact, no forced anything, very polite, withdrew when he was rebuffed. I don't think that is something you can hold against someone and dismiss them. But I'm interested in your comments. Please let me know what you think.
Yes. Terry Ann Arrington wants to know, why is Mueller still in charge?
Well, because nobody's come up with enough evidence to get rid of him. And the conflict of interests in the Uranium One scandal have to be explored and developed and publicized. And then I don't think you'll ever get rid of Mueller. I think what you will do is get an independent prosecutor. And at some point, Mueller might then resign when the conflicts become too blatant.
Well, Benny Trent says, I think it's a smear campaign against Moore.
Any other comments on Moore?
No, I'm having trouble with my feed.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So as they come in, let me know.
Yes.
Now, Trump's approval is up to 46% in the Rasmussen poll. Whenever he goes away and stops tweeting, his approval soars. and it's a pretty good approval rating. And I think the perception that he's in trouble politically is misguided. Now, you've noticed that a lot of retirements are taking place in the House, particularly of senior members. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the Banking Committee, and the Science and Technology Committee have all announced they're not going to run for re-election. And earlier, the chairman of the Government Reform Committee announced that he was pulling out. Why? Well, nobody's reporting the real reason, which is when Gingrich took over as Speaker in 1994, he totally reformed the procedures of the House, not of the Senate, and not of the Democrats in the House. They used the old procedures. But Gingrich set in motion a new ethics rule for the Republicans in the House, adopted as a party. And the rule says that after 6 years of being a committee chairman, you have to retire as chairman and go back to being just a member of the committee. What's happening in all 4 of these cases is the guys reached the 6 years, and they didn't feel much like moving to the back bench, having been chairman, and they figured they'd move on with their lives. This is not a statement of disenchantment with the party or of Trump. This is an example of an ethics reform that's actually working, a mini version of term limits.
Well, first of all, we're number 2 in the world right now.
Good.
And comments are rolling in. One woman, Karen Wild, says that she thinks the accuser should take the polygraph.
I think that's true.
It's a great idea. And Alan McKenzie says, what happened to presumed innocent?
Yep.
And
Read all the comments, not just the ones that agree with me.
oh, no,
Yeah.
they're all, that's all. Richard Reel says she's a bad apple, but did more do it.
Yeah.
And Soros is supposedly backing the Democrat.
Yeah.
Innocent until proven guilty. Richard, I don't believe these women. No one waits 36 years to come out. That's
Yeah.
Annie DeFondi.
Well, good.
And
In fact, I think we'll put up a poll question on it
Yeah.
so people can weigh in here. Now, as with all of these broadcasts, they're sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group, and I wanted to put the case for gold in a different perspective. In 1933, FDR slammed the window shut at the bank and said you cannot bring $1 in and get $1's worth of gold anymore. And every country in the world adopted that policy. Now one country has said it's not going to follow it, and that's China. And they are saying, we will give you $1's worth of gold when you present our currency. And that is going to catch on. I mean, what would you rather have? Gold or the funny money politicians print, which could be deficits and inflated and lose its value. And to increase the amount of yuan and therefore gold in circulation, China, Iran, and Russia have all indicated they will accept yuan, not just dollars, when they sell oil. And again, that'll increase the move toward gold. So that's all a suggestion to you that you contact the PatriotGoldGroup.com, and Renee will post the number on the side there.
already pinned it.
Okay, and it makes sense to get it on the ground floor of this situation while you can. Any other? Yeah, just keep me posted as they come in.
Okay.
Now, YouTube has taken a wonderful stand just now and is blocking the access of one of the world's major jihadists to YouTube. Now, he's dead. He died 6 years ago. But he was his name is Atwar al-Awlaki. Oh, I knew this guy. Awlaki. Anwar al-Awlaki. And he helped shape a generation of American terrorists. He was the indoctrinator for the Fort Hood gunmen, the Boston Marathon bombers, and the perpetrators of massacres in San Bernardino and Orlando. And YouTube, the most popular video site, this one will pass it, but now it's the most popular, has allowed hundreds of hours of Mr. Awlaki's talks to be within easy reach of anyone online. Now, under growing pressure from governments and counterterrorism advocates, YouTube has dramatically reduced its video archive of Awlaki and is deterring people from using it. Well, good. That's about time. There's freedom of speech, but there's also not putting it actively out there and giving everyone the chance to learn how to make a bomb in their spare time.
We have more comments about more. Tom Mahoney says 15 minutes of fame as a fake victim. And
Says what?
15 minutes of fame as a fake victim. That's what
Oh,
he's
yeah,
feeling
the
about
girl.
the accuser. Right. Now, this is a bit heart-wrenching, but Brittany Pearson put it out here, so I'm going to read it. I was about 26 before I spoke out about my abuse. I didn't know until my early 20s that what happened was attempted rape, so I'm torn on whether to believe these women or not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really significant. And, listen, let's time out here. The President of the United States got a hold of a 21-year-old girl and got her into a long-term sexual relationship with extensive touching and extensive sex. And while 21 is different from 16, it's not that different from 16. So this is an issue that has moved up in our consciousness, and he got away with it.
And John Picaro says a polygraph will not convince the Democrats, but would convince the independents.
Yeah, I think so. Now, when you look at the events going on politically at this point, you've got to comment on the fact that life is about to become much harder in blue states than in red states. That really not through Trump's policies nearly as much as through the Democratic response to those policies. First of all, Trump is going to pass, it looks like, an end to the deduction for state income taxes, which hits overwhelmingly New York, California, Massachusetts, and the state New Jersey, Connecticut, and the states of the blue states, the northeastern states. California's income tax is 13%. New York's plus New York City's is 11%. New York City has its own income tax. And the state governments and local governments are not cutting taxes. They're not going to roll it back. They're going to leave it right where it is. And by ending the deduction, it's basically a 40% tax increase, because it means you can't deduct it, and normally you would save 40% of the tax on your tax bill. If you're going to pay $10,000 in state income taxes, Uncle Sam is going to pay $4,000 of it, but now he won't. You'll have to pay it. The second thing is that when Obama passed Obamacare, he inserted a big provision, which ended up being just as significant financially as Obamacare, which was the change in Medicaid. And he said that from now on, you had to cover not just poor people on Medicaid, but people 1/3 above the poverty level. So that in the past, for an individual, it differs state by state, but the usual coverage was $15,000 or $16,000 in income, and now it went up to $23,000 and $25,000 of income. Some states had much, much lower. Texas had only about a quarter of income, $5,000. But that dramatically raised the cost of Medicaid. Now, the states haven't felt it yet because the feds included a come-on provision that said for the first 3 years they would reimburse 90% of the cost. And then it would drop back to 60 and then go back to the normal match, which is usually 60 or 50%. So they haven't felt it yet, but boy, they're going to feel it now. But then the Supreme Court came along, and in the suit that challenged Obamacare's constitutionality, upheld the constitutionality of Obamacare, but said that the Medicaid increase would be voluntary. The states could decide whether to accept it or not. And 31 largely blue states said, yes, we'll take it, and 19 largely red states said, no, we won't. Okay? Now, Trump has come in and said if states want to impose a work requirement so that people have to work in order to get Medicaid benefits, just like they have to work in order to get welfare benefits for the Bill Clinton's Welfare Reform Act that I worked with him on. But this is going to be up to the states, voluntary. And you know that New York and California and New Jersey and Massachusetts are not going to adopt it. And you know that Texas and Florida and the red states will adopt it. So that you'll now have a situation where the blue states are not only paying a non-deductible income tax, but are paying this huge increase in Medicaid without reducing the rolls by people who won't work. And this is going to create a dramatic disparity in the financial impact of people in different states. And I think it's going to be like tilting the map of the United States. And rich people are going to move out of the blue states and into the red states. There was a survey that was just done in Connecticut where they found that half of the people who are making $150,000 a year or more are planning to leave Connecticut within the next 5 years. This is it's a shift in population, almost a little bit like the black migration to the north after the Civil War. It's a major change in which a self-selected group of largely wealthy people will leave the industrial Northeast. And they'll all become a little bit like Detroit, raising taxes, losing their tax base, spending more money, raising taxes to cover it, losing their tax base, and going into a downward spiral. It's very serious, and it's come about as a result of Trump's policies and the Democratic stubbornness in responding to that.
Dick, Jonathan Major asks, could the Rhino establishment be totally behind the Moore thing?
I think they're largely behind it. I think they had a lot to do with it, because that was a very embarrassing defeat, and they're still smarting from it. And would they cut off their own nose and endanger a Senate seat going to the Democrats to spite their own face? You bet they would. But bear in mind that the first poll after the attack was made still shows Moore with an 11-point lead. And if he takes a lie detector test, and it's a credible test, I think that he's going to be elected. Now, you want to hear the most outrageous thing in the entire world. Okay, this takes something, but it's really true. If you or I are sued for sexual harassment, the lawsuit proceeds as soon as it's filed, and if we lose, we have to pay the victim. Not if you're a member of Congress, and not if you're a member of the congressional staff. A law was passed in 1995 that said that for anyone who sues a member of Congress or a member of the staff has to go through mediation and counseling, a 3 or 4 month process, which obviously deters people from suing because they're worried about being put on the griddle and scrutinized and their sexual conduct in the past publicized and all of that. And if you recover, if the harassment is found to have happened and the judge gives you a verdict, the congressman and the staffer does not pay the verdict. The taxpayer does. There have been $15 million of verdicts since this law was passed in 95, affecting over 350 cases. And in every one, the taxpayer paid the bill, not the congressman. So go ahead and sexually harass that lady, Mr. Congressman.
Boy.
It's on me. Do you believe that? What an incredible law.
That's crazy.
Now, Christmas is coming, and if you would like to send a signed copy of Rogue Spooks, the categories in the bestseller list. One of them, I think, is fortune telling, and I'm going to switch Rogue Spooks from politics to fortune telling because it accurately is predicting every single thing that is happening, including the thing I led this broadcast with, which was the core role of fusion in fabricating these allegations. So get it and read it. It's only now is it becoming apparent that everything we wrote in there was prescient. It's the book I'm most proud of any of the 19 that Eileen and I have written. So if you want to give it to a relative or friend or enemy, and you want a signed book plate for it, just go to Dick Morris Promos at Gmail. Dick Morris Promos at Gmail. And we'll send you a handwritten note from me. Merry Christmas, Bob, signed Dick Morris. And I hope you like that.
I'm pinning this on here right now.
So it's dickmorrispromos.com. And the selfie of the day, the person who actually is holding up a copy of the book on my homepage, changes each day, is Annie DeFondi. Annie DeFondi. And a shout out to Patty Cooper Sabo. Yeah.
I'll tell you why
Hi,
we're
Patty
shouting
Cooper
out.
Sabo.
She and I are friends on Facebook now because of you. And the other day she posted, "Love you all. We had fun. Deleting my account. Bye." So she was deleting her Facebook account. And then she writes back, "Okay, well, that didn't last long. I just can't do it. It's the only way I can see Dick Morris, Deep Six of Deep State, so I'm back again now."
Oh, good. Okay. I'm afraid that I cost the team one.
She missed you, so she had to log back into Facebook.
That's cute. Thanks a lot. So I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be able to talk a little more and a little bit more clearly. I'm sorry, I'm fudging some of the words. I have a lisp because my tongue is swollen. Feels like a whale in my mouth.
Aw.
Thank you.